So good afternoon, everyone. This is Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council, and I'm joined by Jonathan Kirsting. He's Vice President of all things media and marketing for the Tech Council. We are thrilled to be here today. Like every day, we get a chance to talk to incredible people doing amazing things, and today is no different. Before we jump into our guests today, I just want to tell everyone that we have sponsors that make all this possible so that you can actually hear the 100+ guests that we've had a chance to talk with during this very special time in our world and in our era. Huntington Bank, they've played a critical role with us right from the beginning, particularly as it relates to small business and helping through the CARES Act money as well as the EIDL money, et cetera. They've just been pretty incredible for making sure that our small community in business has had access. So they've been working around the clock since then. Sheets, if you don't know Sheets, they have a mission to provide fast, friendly service and quality products in clean and convenient locations. They're known across the industry as an organization that constantly reinvents themselves. We just had their Chief Operating Officer, Travis Sheets, on a few Fridays ago, and he said that their job right now, they have an innovation group in Pittsburgh, even though they're based in Altoona. Their job is to make sure that they are reinventing Sheets for the future. So we're pretty excited that they're here in Pittsburgh. We're also very appreciative of their support of us. And then we have Comcast. We're pleased to welcome them as our newest sponsor to this series. We're very, very appreciative for the work Comcast has done right from the onset of COVID. They've been working to ensure that low-income families from across service territory could have access to the internet and make sure that people who have been home and not in school have the tools that they need to stay connected. They've been waiving fees. They've been really trying to penetrate those families and individuals that have not had access, and their goal is to bridge the digital divide. So thrilled about them. And then I just want to talk about today's program. Thrilled to be hosting Evan Facher. He is a longtime friend of ours and all things Pitt as well as life sciences. He's the Vice Chancellor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of Pittsburgh, as well as Dr. Michael Hufford. He said that I could say that today. And he's the CEO of LyGenesis, and it's a new startup that could change the world for people facing end-stage liver disease. So we have muted your microphones and we have a chat. And Jonathan is going to manage the questions in the chat, and we're going to run this like a conversation. So we're thrilled to have them both. I welcome, Evan, welcome Michael, really appreciate it. I would like to start right away with Evan. And Evan, you have this sort of ginormous role at the University of Pitt. It's probably so big that we probably won't get to talk about everything that you're doing. I know we spoke a little bit before we went live, and there's a lot going on, but talk about who Evan is, the man. Like, Evan, what's your personal background? How did you get, joining Pitt?
So let's see. So I was born and raised in New York. I was born in Brooklyn before it was cool to be in Brooklyn. Back then it was a place you tried to get out to the suburbs as quickly as possible. I did my undergraduate work down in the University of Miami, Florida, then came up to Pittsburgh and did my PhD in human genetics up here at Pitt. I did a postdoc, and then after that I went to Case Western Reserve and did my MBA with a focus in entrepreneurship. And then after that I spent 15 years in life sciences industry, half of that time in small companies, half of that time in super large pharma companies. I've done everything from running businesses or business units, overseeing business development, corporate strategy, M&A, fundraising. And then about 6 years ago, I got a call from the university from a guy by the name of Mark Melandro, who was starting up this thing called the Innovation Institute at the University of Pittsburgh. And they were looking for folks that had industry experience to join the university to help them change the way the university did commercialization. So I've been here now at Pitt for the last 6 years. The last 3 or so of which have been specifically in this role on the Vice Chancellor side, where we oversee all commercialization activities in the university, everything from the university's intellectual property portfolio and the licensing of new technologies, the creation of new companies, things that are created from the nearly $1 billion of annual R&D the university gets from federal and corporate sources. We have the most immersive student programming on campus. So this is where students with their own ideas come to us. We have a student accelerator and an incubator and programs and competitions. We work with about close to 2,000 students a year in that area. Then we also see the Institute for Entrepreneurial Excellence, which is our small business development center, actually one of the largest in the entire Commonwealth. That group works with early stage businesses throughout Southwestern PA to provide entrepreneurial assistance. We help create Main Street businesses, and we help work with growth businesses. And the last piece, we just moved into our organization as well as what we call the Office of Economic Partnership. So that's really the university's gateway to scaling our partnership capabilities with third parties. And then in my off time, I'm also the current interim CEO of LyFX, which is a local accelerator focused on life science early stage companies.
That's hardly anything, but thank you for that. How are you holding up through COVID?
We're doing pretty well. I think altogether, what really has driven us is, despite the fact that our entire organization has been remote since March, it's really what we see is the resiliency of our faculty who've pivoted a lot of their research towards solutions for the current situation. We've seen our students change the way that they have to live and work on campus, and we've seen a significant amount of new innovation and inventions, and kind of really the whole idea of entrepreneurship, of doing things very differently and dealing with kind of new market needs. We've seen that across the gamut of all the folks that we work with, is this change in way they do things, and identifying new innovations that we could move forward with, either things from the lab or things from the dorm room.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to jump over to Dr. Michael Hufford and just say, hey, Michael, thank you for being here. Thanks for
it's my
what
pleasure.
you're doing.
Thanks
Talk about yourself a little bit and what led you to become what's known as an executive in residence, or an EIR, at the Innovation Institute, and then now to become the CEO of LyGenesis.
Sure. So just brief background. So yeah, I was born and raised in Indiana. I went to Purdue University for my undergraduate, but came here to the University of Pittsburgh, got my master's and PhD here in clinical psychology, trained a lot at the Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic, then went off and was a clinical and research fellow in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard before doing a stint as an assistant professor myself, where I got recruited out of my academic tenure track position by a Pitt professor who was spinning a company out of the University of Pittsburgh way back in 1999, kind of early 2000s, way before such things.
What company? What company?
It was in vivo data.
Sure.
Yeah,
I know those guys.
Yeah. That's great. Okay.
Yeah. So Saul Schiffman spun that out, and Doug Inkfer was our first CEO. So, was one of the very first employees there. That got me exposed. That was really my initial transition from academia to the life sciences industry side. And now for the past 20 years, I've had an opportunity to spend time in San Diego in public biotech, have started some of my own companies, and literally run the clinical R&D out of my third floor office in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and then moved back to Pittsburgh about 4 years ago. Was doing some consulting to the pharmaceutical industry when I met Evan and his colleagues at the Innovation Institute, and really jumped at the chance to be an entrepreneur in residence, because I had such, I had a wonderful experience here and wanted to just try to leverage that industry experience to help with what really can be a chasm in translational medicine between academic discovery and what's of value to the pharmaceutical industry. There really can be quite a chasm there. And so I wanted to try to help bridge that. And so met Evan and his colleagues, and that's how I got introduced to the technology that is now LyGenesis.
So tell us, what is LyGenesis?
I'm glad you asked. LyGenesis is, yeah.
Please tell us more.
Yeah, right, exactly. LyGenesis is a biotech company. We are focused in organ regeneration. And so how I talk about our technology is we are able to regrow a functioning mini organ within a patient's body using the lymph node as a mini factory or a bioreactor for that to happen. And the highest level summary really is that the problems with organ transplantation today are twofold. One donated organ treats only one patient. Conversely, it involves a very high risk, expensive surgical procedure. Using our technology, one donated organ, our lead technology is in the liver, as you mentioned, can serve as the seed for up to 75 patients. So really fundamentally disrupting the supply-demand calculus as it relates to organ donation. And we engraft our cellular therapy using an outpatient procedure, an endoscopic ultrasound, which means that patients that would never qualify for an organ full transplant just because they're not healthy enough will be able to tolerate that outpatient procedure. So we spun out of the university back in 2018, did a very small A round of venture capital, closed a convertible note in late 2019, and we're in the midst of working on closing a $25 million B round of financing and kicking off our first clinical trial.
Wow.
And so this is now where you're starting to deal with humans, right?
That's exactly right. So, I was very fortunate. So at Pitt, Eric Lagasse is our chief science officer. He's at the McGowan Institute for Regenerative Medicine in the Department of Pathology. Eric, has gotten really a decade's worth of NIH support. And so he's done just an incredible amount of foundational academic work at the University of Pittsburgh. And really timing is so important in startups, right? And it was just so fortunate that when I came across Eric and his colleague Paulo Fontes, who's a transplant surgeon, our chief medical officer, had trained with Tom Starzl at the Starzl Center for Transplantation for many, many years. So much of the foundational small animal and some of even the large animal work had been done. And as someone who had interacted a lot with the FDA, and I joke with folks that I speak regulatory because it really is key in life sciences. You have to be able to speak regulatory. So we were able to get in front of the FDA, get some key buy-in so that we could accelerate our clinical trial. And so you're absolutely right. Our lead indication is for patients with end-stage liver disease. But we also have proof of concept data that we can regenerate the pancreas for type 1 diabetes, the kidney for end-stage renal disease, as well as the thymus that has a lot of interesting and very complicated biology that could be involved in autoimmune disease and aging and a variety of other things.
Well, what is the incidence of end-stage liver disease?
Yeah, so end-stage liver disease in the US, part of the challenge is that not only do you have a lot of end-stage liver disease, and that can be from cirrhosis or hepatitis or other causes, but it's also the case with non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, also known as fatty liver disease, NASH. There's sort of this growing epidemic of fatty liver disease. And we know that about 2 to 3% of those patients too will have advanced fibrosis and will likely end up needing a transplant or some sort of restorative curative therapy or a bridge to transplant. So, conservative estimates would put, you probably have a couple of million people that are in need of a transplant or, could use one but will not make the list. So you probably have, even if you only capture 10% of that market, right, you're at a couple 100,000 patients in the US.
Great. And so you're looking at the fact that these lymph nodes could be used in the replication or regeneration of pancreas and other organs.
That's exactly right. I mean, nature has endowed us with really 500 of these factories throughout our body. Naturally, they produce T cells, right? And from an evolutionary perspective, as a species, we've evolved to fight infection because that's what killed us. And so our lymph nodes, critical to that, right? That's why when you get sick, you can feel your lymph nodes get swollen, right? And so evolution has made them highly effective bioreactors, and we're really hijacking that for this therapeutic purpose of turning them into mini factories for these organs, just the way cancer does to grow a tumor, but we're leveraging it in a therapeutic way to grow these ectopic organs.
Right. So you're a farmer, right? Wouldn't you say you're sort of like a farmer?
That's an interesting way to think of it. Yes, I suppose I am a farmer, and the lymph node is my field that I sow my seeds in. That's right.
Yeah, it's life science farming.
Yeah.
And so really great. It's a really great story, a really great example of what happens behind the walls over at Pitt. that we don't get a chance to all of us just talk about. So thanks for sharing. We'll get back to you in a minute. So, all right. So Evan, we just heard like just an incredible example of, what can happen in a lab, the McGowan Institute, and then a spin out. None of this happens by accident. So can you discuss the ways that you're ramping up the efforts over at Pitt to help transition the discoveries to the marketplace?
Sure.
Selfishly, we care about this, right? As a region, we care because you're creating jobs and you're solving complex health issues.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those things put Pittsburgh on the map.
Yep. So I think the use of the word ramp up is a good one, because over the last 6 years, really with the creation of the Innovation Institute, the university has really changed its perspective and had a very different focus on the commercialization of university technologies than it had previously. So in these 6 years alone, we've now spun out over 100 companies based on university technology. So it's really been a significant sea change that we've seen on our campus, and given the size of the research engine, there's just so many things that come into us that we have the opportunity to get out the door. So for example, the number of new ideas that come into our offices annually that we get to analyze and assess and kind of pick which ones we can protect and which ones may make good startup companies or which ones may make good opportunities to go to existing companies. We last year, the fiscal year just closed, we had our largest number of new disclosures that came into the office. There was 394 new ideas came into our office from faculty on campus, from research labs on campus, for things that are inventions that may be things that we can take out to market or things that we can create companies around. So the ability first to identify these folks and really to identify those folks, we treat them as customers. So us as a service organization have to develop things that they will value, or we have to provide them with a value proposition to work with us. So we have really taken a lot of what a number of the staff that we've added to our group are people that have come from industry or come from outside of academia, that have come from managing products or marketing functions, so that we can really think of ourselves as marketing to our internal customers to make sure that we have as much buy-in from them. And to do that, we have to offer them things that they think are of value. And that's really one of the main ways that we've changed the culture, is by offering a whole collection of products and services that our customers actually need to get them to work with us and to get them to engage with us. And a perfect example is what Michael just said. One of the kind of the services that we had to offer were entrepreneurs in residence. So a lot of our faculty are really great at getting grants and understand the science like nobody else in the world. But when it comes to understanding the business part of it, we want to pair them up with somebody who may be able to provide them with that set of knowledge. So in Michael's case, we connected him with Eric Lagasse, who is a brilliant researcher and needed someone to help him think through things on the business side. So that was just another service that we offered, where people like Michael that could work with them on campus to help them get their ideas to a place where they could have the maximal societal benefit that they could have. Because if those ideas stay inside the university, it may be great for papers and publications and getting additional grants, but it's not going to have that intended societal benefit unless it's outside the university with some third party that can make a real product or service out of it.
So now that Michael is no longer an EIR, do you now, and you've lost him to the goodness of trying to get this work out? Yes. Nice job, and yes. Nice for everyone.
Yes, unfortunately.
Do you feel behind Michael?
Yes, we still love Michael. So we actually, to make sure that folks like Michael can be successful, one of the things the university did was create this external accelerator incubator called LyFX. And it's not, even though Pitt was involved with the creation of it, it's more of a regional economic development opportunity to provide early stage life sciences companies with the care and feeding that they need once they're out of the university. So most of my folks are all focused on faculty and staff and students inside the university, and we try to get them the opportunity to get their ideas out to the marketplace. And once we once we sign the licensing deal, we get the startup done, we shake their hand and pat them on the back. And then from a regional perspective, we needed to put them someplace where they can continue to have a soft landing or a continued kind of environment for them to get the help that they need. Because as you folks know, certainly as well as I do, that the life sciences business is very different than the robotics or the manufacturing business or the AI business. So we wanted to make sure that they have an environment where they can continue to get the regulatory, the reimbursement, the IP help. So we were able to get LifeX set up a couple of years ago, and that provides companies like Michael a landing spot where now they can be in an environment where they're around other early stage companies, or they're in the environment where we have workshops and lectures and seminar series, because we want them to be successful for the longer term. And without a company like that being successful, again, the technology that was created on the campus is never going to impact a patient or impact the world that we wanted to have. So the kind of that conclusion of that story of Michael was that we were able to get him and LyGenesis into the LifeX platform, where they are currently there looking to expand potentially into some of our newly minted laboratory space that we have as well for these early stage companies. But it's part of this bigger ecosystem. It can't just be the university, it has to be the university and kind of the regional economic development folks to help these things grow and be successful.
And I really appreciate you sort of setting the stage in terms of the conversation, that you have an economic development focus, you have a company focus, you have a faculty focus, and you have an entrepreneurial focus, which makes it exciting. And you're also working in life sciences that has much of a longer play than it does if you and I would come up with an app. Not that our app wouldn't be, additive to the world, but it's a totally different journey. So I want to jump back to Michael and say, Michael, if there are researchers working at the university labs right now, what advice might you give them about like taking their research, taking their discovery into a startup? I mean, because it's very complex, and you know that from your own professional journey.
No, it is very complex, and I would amplify what Evan had said, right? Each field and discipline is unique, and in the life sciences, a particular burden is how capitally intensive the resources are to move things forward, right? And so very often extraordinarily large amounts of capital are needed to make progress in the kind of FDA pathway toward approval. And what's more, the life sciences industry and the pharma industry and what venture capitalists value, right, are things that are far enough along that some of the risk has been removed, and that they want to invest the least amount of capital possible to de-risk the asset as much as possible. And so the challenge that I think a lot of academics face, and I had an opportunity to work with a number of brilliant folks, not just Eric, kind of on their ideas, is there can be a gap between where something's at when you publish it in Science or Nature or Cell, which might really represent the pinnacle of an academic career. And the challenge is, as exciting and as valuable as that potential is, where a lot of life science VCs expect things to be is a little further along, more of the de-risking work done, that oftentimes isn't very exciting science. It's the blocking and tackling of drug development, right? So, I'm getting off on a tangent, I guess, to answer your question in terms of the advice I would give.
Right.
Is sort of know your audience. And when you're talking and you're trying to raise venture capital in life sciences in particular, right? I always tell folks, bear in mind, a life science VC, the next meeting is with another brilliant professor who also just got published in Science or Nature or Cell. And you really have to share with them a vision of concretely, how are you going to move from where you are today to something that's going to be more valuable? How much time do you need? How much money do you need for that? And that's the kind of nuts and bolts of drug development. And if you can speak that language and tell a story that bridges the science to sort of where things need to be to become a profitable human therapy, that's where you can get checks written that get companies spun out.
Well, very often, I mean, the other thing that I probably should have added is that the complexity of people who are doing research are not necessarily people who are willing to do what you've done, Michael, and take it out into the world, right? So, I mean, it's a cultural
Yes, there's a risk
transformation.
tolerance. Yeah, that's true.
What is that?
I say, yeah, I mean, part of it is risk tolerance, right? You're
Right.
absolutely right. There's
Hmm.
being an entrepreneur, especially in life sciences, but in any field, right, is very risky. And so you're right. There's kind of a cultural change and a different, risk tolerance for folks typically kind of on an academic tenure track versus in an entrepreneur track.
Right, right. So Jonathan, is there a question out there that you want to ask? And I want to then jump to Evan.
There is not just a question, there's a question and a comment. So I'll go both of them in here right now. So first I'll go with the comment real fast from basically saying just read a quote on LinkedIn today that an idea is worth $0 without execution. That seems to be what we're talking about here. Very interesting perspective, which we all say is very true. So here's a question. This goes to Evan. Earlier in the webcast here, you were talking about some undergraduate programs that Pitt has for students. Are those available to other students at other universities?
So it's an interesting question. For the most part, if there's a Pitt student involved, then it doesn't make a difference where the individual is from. If it's purely kind of an external, non-Pitt connected at all, we have this organization called the Institute for Entrepreneurial Excellence, which exists purely to help all businesses and all entrepreneurs throughout the entirety of Southwestern PA to take their idea and make it into a business or grow that business. So in that organization, for example, we last year created about 52 new companies, nothing having to do with Pitt intellectual property, purely the individual's idea. They provide consulting services, education services, networking services. So that's kind of when we look at our product offerings, we have one that's really mainly focused on faculty and university intellectual property. We have one that's focused mainly on students and their ideas. And then that third pillar is focused on in the region, anybody in the region, doesn't make a difference, an opportunity to be helpful to them and taking their ideas and moving them towards impact. So if it's a student from another university and they're in our region, there's a way that the university can help them. It's just a matter of slotting them into the right product that we can get them into.
So as we wind down, Evan, COVID, right? I mean, we've been doing these talks since COVID. It's definitely impacted your team. I know that you're working remote, but students are now back. And, how are you keeping the research teams? I mean, how do they stay intact if they have to be in clean rooms, if they have to, depending upon what type of research people are doing? How do you manage that?
So it's at the peak of everything, kind of in the earliest days, it was almost 80+% of our research operations had ceased as we were trying to understand what was happening. And
wow.
And starting as of June, we started to go the other direction and start to ramp things up. So there's one of the great things about being part of a university like ours is the connectivity to, I think it's the 7th largest healthcare system in the world, in UPMC, and we have our own, one of the top ranked public health schools in the world as well. So we were able, from a university perspective, to design procedures and processes to work with our researchers to get them back online, so that now we actually have a fairly large percentage of our research operations back up and running. And there's their world has certainly changed. Mm-hmm. When we build laboratories, originally we built them to get as many people in them as possible. Now with de-densification, we can't. So moving things to shift work or working different days of the week, but having a very different set of PPE that they have now than they would have had back in the day, and the break rooms have to look different. So, but there's been a significant amount of planning that has gone on at the individual lab level to see how do we get that lab up and running. So at this point, a good chunk of the labs are up and running. The challenge for us is we're not on campus to go knock on the door and talk to them about things. So we've had to pivot all of what we do to remote as well. And the interesting thing is that in these kinds of Zoom settings with folks on campus, it's actually at times been easier to get their attention because they don't have to come to our office, or that we don't have to meet them at a time at their office. It's easier to get a broader collection of people together than it was prior to that. So despite kind of the pandemic, a lot of our numbers have gone in a positive direction only because we've found new ways. We've tried to be innovative and entrepreneurial ourselves, and how do we connect with our customers because we can't connect with them in the ways that we did in the past.
So what's next? If I was to check in with you in the next 5 months, what do you think?
I would be going to Michael's house for a huge celebration of their closing of their $25 million round.
That sounds right to me.
Okay, Michael, how much money are you trying to raise right now?
We have a $25 million B round that we're circling currently. And so that will fund the completion of our clinical trial, as well as a lot of the other preclinical work to IND enable or help us bridge the other therapies into human clinical trials.
Okay, that's great. So we'd have a party. That's number one, which makes all of us excited if you get to that phase. So we will keep our eyes open. What else? Anything else?
We have one last question.
Yeah, we've started to take on a different perspective from a university view around how we have to engage with industry partners to do partnerships at a larger scale. So I think one of the things that we'll see from the university is a very different posture related to how do we work with third parties in a way that is more scaled out than kind of individual transaction by transaction basis. So that's something that we historically have not evolved into, and one that right now we have a team in our organization that for the last four or 5 months has been growing and connecting and strategizing and been working with a lot of large companies. So I think one of the other things that you'll see from the university is its engagement from an industry partner perspective. A lot of the earlier stuff we've talked about is the systematic, how do we get more inventions? How do we get more startups? How do we get more patents? Now it's how do we take all that and roll that up into larger relationships with corporate partners?
Okay. Well, is there anything else, Michael, that you want to add? Evan, we are thrilled that we have the both of you here. And it's always amazing just to hear what's going on behind the scenes and what is percolating outside. So we are staunch supporters of the work that you're doing there, Evan. And we look to hear more. Hopefully you'll stay connected with us and we can have some more companies that come on our show, which would really be great because you're doing life-changing work and making people's lives better. Even though, Michael, I sort of called you a farmer, but you know that you're more than that. So I just want to thank you both for joining us here today and thank our audience. We do this each and every day. We have a packed week next week that kicks off with Brad Feld joining us from Colorado and talking about entrepreneurial ecosystems and what they've learned as they started Techstars. Tomorrow we have PA Cyber. Most people who are going back to school and have kids under the age of 17 are wrestling with lots of complexities in their lives, trying to work and understand the opportunities for schooling. And then we're also partnering with the Jewish Healthcare Foundation and doing Fempreneur work conversations next week. This marks 100 years of women's right to vote. And we're going to focus on those things that have built tomorrow. So I want to thank everyone. This is Audrey Russo, joined by Jonathan Kirsting, Evan and Michael. Keep us posted. Thank you for your work. Thank you for what you're doing. Everyone else, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.